Well, everybody has a favorite song, right? Some of you have so many of those. They're in categories. Songs that make you cry, fall in love again, dance a bit. Some of you can automatically start moving your feet when you hear certain songs. Then there are songs that awaken a story in your life, right? You know what I'm talking about, that song. I want to know what your favorite songs are. Get them in your head. We're not going to sing them, by the way, especially if it was from the 80s. We're forgetting that decade. Sorry. But I'm not sorry. And so many people are happy that we'll just move them away from our playlist, we'll call it. But we have a playlist, don't you? Do you have a playlist that you work out if you work out? Or we know if we're going to introduce our athletes, right? We got to have a good song, some music for that. There's a song for just about everything. And there are special songs that are enduring. There are songs that are so enduring that they'll, take the 1,000 of years for it to mature and be appreciated. When we look at the book of Psalms, you looking at a whole playlist of the sanctuary. In fact, this is what we have in the book of Psalms. It started way back even before David a little bit. And then David wrote maybe about, several dozen, I think it was more like 50 to 60 Psalms, even more. But David wrote, but then they were recording songs. And when we're talking about songs, we're not talking about just there's a beat and there's 4/4 and then there's some music and there's chords and a melody and harmony. It's not about that. It's actually poetry. And sometimes, most of the time, they had some sort of music around it to be the vehicle of the emotions. But these are not words in the book of Psalms. If you read it, this is not what you'd get from your doctor. You go to your doctor, you get a very concise, usually a little less that you want from them, because they're never going to overshare information, right? But our doctors have a language that they share information. Definitely, politicians, they don't talk in poetry, do they? They have a totally different language. And then we're having just conversations with other people. You have a language, but Psalms are written in such a way that it has this poetry. When you read it, you guys, and some of you are here, I want you to pick up the book of Psalms in the back when you leave. We have these Bibles that have the Bible book. We're reading through the Bible in 3 years here. And we finished our first year, so we're like 30% there. But we're doing the book of Psalms this month. And you can pick one on your way out. It has some room to actually journal. But the book of Psalms, it's one of those books that has language that you're supposed to feel this. You're supposed to interact with this. There's imagery and there's statements. And sometimes when you read, you'll read a line, but then the next line afterward, it's repeating the same thing with just a little bit more information, right? The Lord is my shepherd. And then what's next? This is what it means. So you have this, and sometimes it's just sharing information like that. Sometimes it will contrast ideas. And then you have imagery in there. You have deers and animals and flowers and mountains and stars, and it's just filled with so much vivid color that you're supposed to feel this book, not read it. So, as you do it, invite you to allow that imagery, those words, those thoughts. And I'm just not a journal guy, but I started to do it here. I'm not very good at it. I do a couple things in there, even did a couple images there, but start to interact with this book. But today, we're going to pull out of this song that comes all the way back to David. Now, where did we get this psalm of Psalm 51? Well, this goes back when David's reflecting on a story in his life. So you don't have very many psalms like that, where somebody's just going to capture a story. But in this case, we have David giving his thoughts and his response to a story in his life. And you can find that story. It's not a good story. It's in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. So if you have a moment to do that, go through that story. It's where David, he's, what do we call this? People who are always getting hurt. Right. If they're going skiing, they're going to come down on the bus. If you're playing at a game, they're going to have an ankle. If you're washing the car, they're going to break something. Accident-prone people. David is the guy who is accident-prone. He gets into so much trouble just by being a nice guy, right? So people are trying to kill him just because he's a good musician and he's trying to be kind to the king. There's some bad things happen to David, and they're just tired having so vulnerable. So his people said, get back home into the palace and don't come out. You're a liability out there. So he is homebound. And what happens when you got nothing to do and you're accident prone? You find something, and he did. He was looking at Bathsheba. And we know that story. His lust and his passion moved him down a road that he was like running downhill. In order to have her, he had to make sure that he get rid of the husband. This whole story gets bad. He puts his husband, Uriah, onto the front lines, and he was killed. And what does he do? Nothing. He completely forgets about this incident. In other words, he goes on with life as the king until Prophet Nathan comes and actually says, King, I'm going to tell you a story. Oh, this is great because I love a good story, right? He gets this parable about two people, and a man and a servant, and he's invited people to eat, and he's going to have to get some food, and he's going to have a barbecue, so we need a lamb. And so instead of using his own resources, he goes to a servant, and he uses his only lamb, and this is a horrible story. And it's the kind of story that if we saw this at classrooms or outside on the playground or somewhere in our neighborhoods, we would say, this is wrong. Somebody needs to do something now. And we do that, right? We have people who are very righteous about our justice moments. And we want that, don't we? When people are being hurt, we want that to be fixed. And David said, that man, what should happen to that guy? That guy needs to die. It's like, okay. And then Nathan says that's you. You are that man. And he didn't just leave it there. It's not like there's a light bulb that came into David's heart and mind at that moment. Me? And Nathan read the story, 2 Samuel, chapter 12. He explains the whole story with him. And now at the end of that, you have one of two options. You can actually deflect and defend, and you can find a way to get around that story. Well, this is a little confusing. Or you own it. David, the king, decides to own it. And he says, I have sinned. We're going to use that word a couple times. So in our culture today, sin is just very uncomfortable. People, if you go to a party and stuff like that, you start talking about sin, people will avoid from you, right? You're like a party killer when you do that. Don't talk about that stuff. Well, in this story, you must talk about this. And he does this. And at the end of this incident, that David repents, and now we have something to sing about what happened into my heart and what was going on in my life and what are the implications of me now. David wrote this psalm, Psalm 51, on this. And I'm thinking, what a beautiful piece of work to put this in your playlist, to identify this, to be remembered. But not just to remember, to sing, to live it out, to flesh it out. So let's look at this one song in the playlist. And it starts with this concept of renewal. You look at these jukeboxes. You've seen the jukeboxes before, right? That's exactly what this was, but it had a scroll instead of a jukebox. And it would be one of those moments that you would pull out and use it in a very specific part of worship. It was used into the sanctuary temple. And it would always come at a time when we're reflecting and thinking and celebrating the hardest part, the sacrifice. This song played right at that time. Behold, the Psalm 51, verse 1, it says, have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions. My sin is ever before me, and against you and you alone have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. And all of the beautiful things that might be about a baby were all broken as sinners. And I don't care how they smell. Like babies smell so good. Most of the time, right? Until there are moments. But most of the time, babies are just wonderful. Filled with wonder, joy. It's just amazing. But every child born of a woman are starting with a sense of brokenness in our lives. Behold, you delight in truth in the where? In the inside place, the inward being. And you teach me wisdom. And when you start this part of this psalm, it's broken in three places, stages almost. The first one is where David is basically admitting and acknowledging the brokenness inside of me. And it's almost like he does most of the work in there. It's almost like people are given way too much information, but in this case, it just flows out of him. When you start thinking about the renewal that takes place in us, it needs to start with honesty of what's broken inside of us. If we're going to hide that, you're never going to find a solution. But if you can be honest about what's really true inside, what's broken, you will find a resolution. It reminds me of my neighbor. For many years, he would restore tractors. He's a farmer, so of course he would do this. He came home with one of these tractors. He was looking for one of this forever, and he was going to restore this thing. And when you look at this thing, it's like it's a tractor. You can tell that. It has some rust. It did almost work. It's there. I mean, like, it's not bad, right? However, there was more. So you could just put some paint on this thing, put gas in the tank, and get that thing running, and some people might do that. And if you're a mechanic, and we have several of them here, you can just get the thing running, can't you? It could start running, and it's going to function. Not well. And if you're a carpenter or a doctor, or the hardest thing is a teacher, to find what is really broken or wrong or hard, they have to figure out a mind and how to teach. Tractors are easy, kids. Woo. In all of this, he had to do the opposite of putting paint on. He had to strip it down. The next one, we started to pull apart everything that's hiding the real problem. And over time, you start to sand and clean, and remove things that are broken. Now, we're using this as an illustration of what's going on inside of the heart, but I want you right now to think about something that you have done in your history that maybe you have forgot. Maybe your parents don't know you did. And we're going to confess to all of them, right? I'm just kidding. We're not doing that. They got really nervous right now. Parents were waking up. Well, what happened? Because you know you have done things that even your parents don't know. And you're nodding your heads exactly right. And that's how it's going to stay. However, you know what you're capable of, what you have done. And in the caves and the closets and the places inside of your heart, you know who you are. Now, you're not going to walk around and talk about this stuff, but you know you're broken. More broken than what's in front of us, what you can't perceive and see. You know there's even more. So when people want to complain about me, and they start listing a few things, I'll tell you, you're out of your league. If you want to know what's wrong with me, I don't need a list. You need a book. I know more. So this is why we should probably stay out of each other's business that way, telling people what they should do and what's wrong. I know what's wrong. I'm messed up. And I was going to say, in this place, if there's anyone who feels like they have nothing in your life that you're ashamed about, or anything that you have done that you should confess, to stand up right now. Right, exactly. Maybe you got a bad knee. That's all right, but ultimately, we are a mess, aren't we? And we hide a little bit. We're not close enough to really see it, but we're broken. And David goes all the way to the frame. He goes all the way down to the source. He goes all the way down, and everything gets stripped back. And David says, this is how bad that I can actually capture in words. And he does that. What I love, no matter how you feel, when you repent and admit to God who you are and where you're at, do you know what happens? It's an instant. You see the next picture? That's what God sees. That's who you are. Now, you may not feel that way, because this whole idea of really feeling better and being stronger and more aware and more grace-filled, or a person who understands the concept of mercy in your life, you do get that. But it takes time. It's almost like that tea bag that you put in the hot water, right? It just gets stronger and stronger, but it does take some time. And in this case, I look at this tractor as the restoration process. The moment that we admit and we get to that place, David is actually talking out of both sides of his mouth. I'm so bad, but God's mercy is so sure. Read this again and again, and you'll see on one side of his face, it's like he's saying, I can't believe how bad I am. And then the other side is, surely you're there, and you have this, and you will clean, and you will purify, and you are good, and your mercy is abundant. This is everywhere in here. You can't escape that concept. What a relationship with your Creator, to know all you are and a smidgen of God, and that experience turns you into a broken person to a daughter and to a son in that moment. So you can do it right now in your heart. Right now. You don't even need to listen to the preacher anymore. Just do it in the next few minutes and just admit who you are to God. And in that moment, God transforms you. He'll give you all the time to learn and step in your therapy, your healing, in your growth. You will learn that this is more and more. And this is why when you sing and when you pray and you speak, those things get deeper. And you'll see that at the end. But that process is very hard for us, isn't it? It's not like we immediately go and say, this is who I am. We actually go the other direction, don't we? Now, I don't admit my faults easy. And you can see that in the story of Israel. You remember the story of Israel? 400 years of slavery, but they were liberated with miraculous moments, so you have all the things that you want to follow your God. They crossed the Red Sea, and this is what their route. I had a kid that wrote the route of the Israelites. Can I see that picture here? You could see it. It's a little bit squiggly. He could have directly north to the promised land. Nothing in your way. But what did they do? How did they do that? Why did they do that? What happened? I'll tell you what they did. They do what we do all the time. When we are aware of what's broken in us, things that we say or do or want to do, but we don't have the money or the courage to do it, but it's still in us, we are tempted and we respond to that. What do we do when we get caught in your own heart and mind? I know what I do. I defy it. I'll give you my little list of things that I think humans do. A little list. We defy, we deny, we detour, we defend, we detain, we debunk, we depry us from the things that we really need the most. This is what they do. I'll give you an example in, I think it's the book of Numbers. When these Israelites were there and they're caught in their brokenness, they were called on the carpet and they were saying, "What's going on? Repent." And what did they say? They fought back. In Numbers 11, it says this, "The rabbi with them began to crave other food." What? And again, the Israelites started to what? Wailing, and said, if only we had meat to eat. That would be better, right? Like, we're caught in their sin, and what they're saying, well, we don't have meat to eat. And we used to have really good food in Egypt, and we didn't have to pay for that. And we had these cucumbers that were amazing. Cucumbers? The melons, the leeks, onions, and garlic. But they're listing cucumbers? "400 years of slavery. You don't own a house. You don't have your life. And now you have promised a different place. It's going to take a bit of a hike. You don't have a master other than a God who's telling you things, giving you miracles, and you want cucumbers? Cucumbers, like 90% water. Like they're nothing. I don't get it, but I do it all the time. I want what I want, and I believe what I like to believe. And I'll defer, detain, defend all the time. They want cucumbers. But now they're saying, "Oh, we don't have, all we have this manna, these carbs from heaven that just comes down. It's like a miracle. Well, why do we have to eat that?" If you had miraculous food dropped from heaven, you would be craving cucumbers? I'm sorry. I can do this. I can be that short-sighted and not see what God has done for me, that I'll hold on to my pride, my stubbornness, my self-absorbed activity where I want for what I want. I do it. And I know when I'm doing it too. What a mess. It's not just for them. It's like the leaders. They pulled out. Moses says, "Well, why don't these leaders out? We have to talk to them. These two boys of the priests. Come out here. We need to talk." And they said, "No, we're not coming out." Listen to this. Numbers 16:13. He says, "We will not come and talk to Moses. Is it enough that you have brought us out of a land of what? Flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness?" What did he call Egypt? He called Egypt slavery, the land of milk and honey. Maybe that's when we're at the bottom, is we'll take the most destructive things in our lives and call it as your salvation. That's pretty broken, isn't it? And they did that all the time, but we do this as well. Except we are very clever. We like to change the words and the definitions, and like we don't like the word sin, we call it something else. It's a complicated situation. Instead of adultery or unfaithfulness or disloyalty, it's just a confusing time in my life. You got to be kidding me. David would say, no, I have sinned at the core. But we do this. Like, we don't like certain things. It makes us a little bit abrupt. We do it with food. We do it with things. Like, you know what rapeseed is? Rapeseed. You say that 2 or 3 times, you feel like you need to be rebaptized, right? It's like, this is a terrible word, right? It's a glorious flower, and what do? Oil. But what do we call this? We're cooking today with this rapeseed stuff. No, we use canola instead. Or what about this? Prunes, right? What do we call it? Dried plums. No, prunes, because when somebody say prunes, they're connected completely to laxatives. So we're going to just call it, no, we got dried this, we have dried dirt, we have beef, we have this, we have really? Fish is the worst, because, like, check this out, the toothfish. Who wants to eat a toothfish? People do it all the time, but they'll go to the really nice restaurant, and you think about this, and you'll say, I would like to have some toothfish. No, instead, it's so much better. I'd like some Chilean sea bass. I feel so posh and bougie when I say that. Dolphin fish. Nobody wants to eat a dolphin fish, right? And these are not actually a dolphin. Clinically and biologically, it's not that way, but it's described this way, and there's some reasons, and there's a whole bunch of on the internet that you can actually talk about this and with your friends if you want to. But if you just want to eat this, it's called mahi-mahi. So much better. I'm going to have the chicken. I'm going to do the salad. I'll just have some mahi-mahi. But instead of doing dollfish, because nobody wants to choke down the meat of flipper, we rename this thing. We're like this all the time. We play games with all of the terms and the definitions, but ultimately, David is stripping things back to nothing and saying a spade is a spade and I am broken. And I wonder what would happen into a community of faith if we were just a little bit more liberal with the honesty of our brokenness. A little bit more genuine and a little bit transparent. We don't need to know everything, but man, I need to know I'm not the only one who's messed up. Is there an amen? We got to ask for that. Go back to that first verse. It says wash me thoroughly with my iniquities and cleanse me from my sin. And I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever, ever before me. I know it. So David, in this beautiful song, acknowledged the gravity of sin. And then number 2, he embraced the abundant mercy of God. This is a choice that you do. You say it. You ask for it. And he does it right here. He says, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall. So there's a sense of certainty. When you're asking things that you may or may not get, you have a sense of uncertainty, right? Maybe I'll get it, I won't. Not in this case. I'm asking for something that's an automatic yes. It's in his language. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit inside of me. Cast me not away from my presence. Take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with that willing spirit. I love it. And you know, you have to ask for it. There's a moment where you declare it. You say it. It's almost like in that trust fall, that little moment of the trust fall, it's all about that moment where you say it, or you completely commit and you can't go back. That is that center salient part of faith in God's abundant mercy. When you fall, you're falling into something that you're declaring certain. But I remember when I was maybe third or fourth grade, I had a thing that I did. I like to put things. Well, actually, the opposite of putting things together, but take apart things, like anything. I could do that too, like your smoothie machine. Anything that had a screw that I can unscrew, I would just start. When I learned about that there are tools to unscrew those things, I started finding things to do. My parents worked hard. I was hard at working on what I was doing. I would just do this. I got in so much trouble. Everybody in the neighborhood was like about 2 or 3 years older than me, right? So and they all had cool things. This one kid down the other neighborhood had this go-kart. It was a go-kart that would go. It was like a lawnmower, right? I wanted to have a lawnmower. I wanted to make one. But I didn't want to have the thing that goes. That was so embarrassing. I want to have something that was like a jet. The only thing in my house that would make the sound of a jet is my mom and dad's Kirby vacuum. And so, into the garage, I took apart this whole vacuum all the way down to that motor. I had the wheels, didn't know how I was going to attach that, and it was there, and then I had this thing with wires. I had no idea to turn a vacuum into a go-kart. But more importantly, when I had to go back and put all the parts together to a broken car thing to turn it back into a vacuum again, I could not do that. And so what did I did? And I don't remember I did this. I just was like, oh man, I messed up. I put it in the neighbor's, behind his shed, over the fence. Totally forgot about this. Until one day, Mr. Rob comes over, finds my dad, and says, hey, Don, you throwing stuff in my shed back? Like, is this your stuff? It's dumped over the fence on my side. Of course, my older brother, he's here. He's like, he never does anything. So Dad didn't even look at Scott. Other little brother's the baby. Couldn't do that. Probably couldn't do it now. I was there. I don't know. I'm sure I probably started to lie. I always start with that. Then I don't have to say what happened. It's not important. It was just this. When you're caught, and you're done. You gotta tell the truth. You do all this stuff. It doesn't really make sense. What's he going? Is he having a stroke? What's wrong with this kid? At the end of that, I'm reminded of what we'll do to avoid the moment of mercy. Why would we avoid that? Finish the story. David says this: I acknowledge the sin. It's true about me. But just as sure and even more, Romans would say, even sin is great. What is even greater? The grace of God is even greater than the dumbest things I'm even capable of doing. And then David says this: tell a story inside of me. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Why? This is the best thing that we can ever do in life. The best thing that you'll ever do in life, and I don't care what you're accomplish in your life, if the most important thing that you'll ever do in life will be return to God as a sinner. That's the biggest thing you'll ever do. Deliver me from blood guiltiness of God, O God of my salvation. In my tongue, sing aloud. We're going to sing real soon. Come on up, you guys. And Lord, open my lips, my mouth, declare your praise. David is saying, you will delight not in the sacrifices, but in our song. And he finishes this psalm about sacrifice again. How can he do that? It's because this song was sung at the time of sacrifice. This is all about worship. And the one thing that we're called to do is to admit, embrace, and tell the story.